Hello, and welcome to this Australia-New Zealand Women's Declaration International webinar for January 2024. My name is Janet Fraser, coming to you from Gundunger-Nurra, west of Sydney. I'm the convener of the Feminist Legal Clinic in Exile. Tonight I have Bronwyn Williams and Anna Kerr from the Feminist Legal Clinic doing tech with me. Wherever you're coming from this evening, we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, but particularly the women of this continent. We have 5 speakers tonight, whom I'll introduce in turn. Renate Klein lives on Djiru country, far North Queensland. Renate is a Swiss-Australian radical lesbian feminist who has been critical of reproductive and genetic engineering since the early 1980s. She started Spinifex Press with Susan Hawthorne in 1991. Her next book is Radical Reckonings, Survival in Patriarchy, due out in late 2024. Susan Hawthorne lives on Djiru country, far North Queensland. Susan's radical feminism has inspired her to activism in politics and poetics. She is a poet, novelist and theorist and has worked in publishing for 4 decades, including as co-founder of Spinifex. Her forthcoming book is Lesbian, Essays on Politics and Existence, also coming out in 2024. Sand Hall lives in the Yuin Nation on Dharawal country. She has just published the 3rd volume of Stories of Women's Lands, Australia. The trilogy of collected stories, photos and illustrations covers the 50 years since these women's lands on the mid-north coast of New South Wales were started and collectively purchased. Sand, originally from Aotearoa, New Zealand, is an activist and volunteer in the women's liberation movement, also since the 1970s. A photographer and community development worker, Sand will include a slideshow of images from the trilogy. The affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances brings together women's liberation groups from across Australia to advocate for women and girls in all domains, and especially where we face discrimination or are physically vulnerable by reason of our sex. AWA groups are secular and are not aligned with any political party. Karen Smith is the founder of AWA and a member of WAC. And Jennifer Rocchioli is a member of the AWA writing team. Women's Rights Network Australia is a non-partisan network of women across Australia who organise to promote and protect our sex-based rights. Their mission is to ensure that every woman in Australia has equal opportunities and protections regardless of her race, religion, sexuality or any other characteristic. They work tirelessly to raise awareness about women's rights and to advocate for policies that promote sex-based equality and women's empowerment. Now I'd like to hand over to our first speaker, Renate Klein. Over to you.
Hello, everyone, and hello, Janet, and thank you very much for inviting Susan and me to talk about Dale Spender and her wonderful life. And actually, I've been quite sad the whole day today. I'm not really sure why. And then I thought maybe it's because I've been thinking about Dale quite a lot. And, you know, Dale should be with us doing one of these Women's Declaration International seminars and not be dead at, well, she was 80, but that's not such a high age. Anyway, Susan and I have written an obit for Dale, which is on the Spinifex site. So I'm going to use some of the same examples, but not all of them. Dale was hugely important in my life. In fact, she was one of about 5 women who have majorly impacted the direction my life has taken. I could be in a totally different space today if I hadn't met Dale. Now, how did I meet Dale? It's actually quite a funny story. That was a long way back in 1979. Dale was close to publishing Man-Made Language and had been invited by the National Women's Studies Association to give a keynote. I had just finished, no, I hadn't read. I was was studying and teaching women's studies at Berkeley University of California at Berkeley with Gloria Bowles. And I was really finding my way. I was still a bit sort of unsure where I was going, what I was doing, because I had been a biologist and had actually recently switched to becoming a women's studies person. And I would then write the book together with Gloria Bowles' Theories of Women's Studies. But in 1979, I was quite a young one and not sure really where to be. But I had applied for a PhD and I got 2 acceptances, one from New York and the other from London University. And so there was Dale, who lived in London, and I thought, I should really go over to her and ask her if that was a good idea, blah, blah, blah. And I was still, gathering my what's the word, my courage to go and speak to this quite famous woman. And I see her coming to me, absolutely straightforward to me, and she pointed at me and said, "Where did you get that raincoat from?" Now, my raincoat actually was red and not purple, because they, as you know, after a certain time, started to wear only purple. And she always liked purple, but my raincoat was red. I was so taken aback that this famous woman was asking me this question. But honestly, 10 minutes later, I had her address, her phone number. I had a woman who she said would help me find a place to stay in London, which she did. And I didn't know really what had happened. Then, when I did get to London, and that was on the 1st, or maybe the beginning of January 1980, as a very, very cold day, and I drove from Zurich with my little red car to London. That was actually I was really quite afraid of how I would manage this. Had gotten indeed a little bedsit. It was totally new territory for me. But I arrived there, and you wouldn't believe it, that very evening, I was already sitting at a meeting with Dale of one of the many feminist collectives that she would introduce me to. That was Dale. She always helped women to find their feet, to do something new, to get over their fear, because fear it certainly was for me at the beginning, and to help them achieve more and more. So Dale introduced me to heaps of feminists. She introduced me to a lot of her work. Mostly, I would go over to Dale's place a couple of days every week. Took me about more than 1.5 hours to go over there with the tube and walking and bus, blah, blah. And almost every day when I arrived there, which would have been around maybe 9:30 or so, Dale was already sitting there writing, and we often would start the day by her reading me the latest installment of what she had written during the night, because Dale was a night owl. She worked a lot during the night, smoking and drinking, as she wrote. So I got privy to hear lots and lots of what would become one of her famous work, Women of Ideas and What Men Have Done to them, which was absolutely fascinating. That's right. There's the book there. If you haven't read this book, please do yourself a favor and show it, read it. It is so full of information. Dale just went to the British Museum, found all these lost women, and found, of course, so much material, because it wasn't that there was no material, but nobody had bothered talking about it, and then got it together in this fantastic book. And of course, the subtitle was really good. Women of Ideas and What Men Have Done to Them. So Dale, of course, herself was a woman of ideas. And as I said already before, she encouraged other women to do as many things as they wanted. Like, for me, she said, well, you're good at writing and good at editing. I didn't hardly knew what that was. Would you like to help me with Women's Studies International Forum, the journal that she had started in 1978? Yes, of course, I said. And so before I knew it, I was not quite before I knew it, but in a couple of years or so, I was becoming the European editor. And it was such an exhilarating place to be because especially at that time, until maybe about the year 2000, Women's Studies International Forum had mostly radical feminist articles, and to be in touch with all the writers was just fabulous. There was a funny moment also because the supervisor where I had started my PhD with, and my PhD actually was, you would be surprised, those of you who know my work on reproductive technology, nothing of the sort. It was a very giant investigation into the women power and the theoretical power of women's studies as an international movement. I did get it finished in the end, but it was interrupted by all my other work, including all the work I did on reproductive technologies. Anyway, my supervisor and I soon didn't really get along. And I think it was that she didn't really like my radical feminism, as simple as that. But what she said to me, she said, I think your English isn't good enough. And so my dear Dale actually took the pages that I had written, edited them, added her own little bits, and I then submitted that to Margarita, was the unfortunate woman's name, and got it back with exactly the same comments. Unfortunately, your English isn't quite up to scratch. And Dale and I, honestly, we almost rolled ourselves laughing. Because one thing about Dale, those of you who've never met her, she was one of the wittiest persons that I've ever known. She just laughed so much and was really actually an incurable optimist. Well, we did that about 2 or 3 times until obviously I realized I was never going to get my PhD. And so gradually I changed to another supervisor. But that was very, very funny that Dale helped me with that, and that didn't actually work. I think another thing to say about Dale is that not only did she encourage women to start doing work that they, felt maybe not quite up to it, but she also encouraged them to really start like publishing houses. So, for instance, the Pandora Library and the middle book here that's on the screen, there's always been a women's movement this century, was certainly one of these groups, and I think there were more, at least about 10 books that were published all by different women, and they enabled that. She was a great synthesizer and a great enabler. There was a funny story that went along with that. There's always been a women's movement this century. This is the notion that some people said, oh, yeah, there's been the movement for women's suffrage, but then there was nothing between that and the women's liberation movement, which of course was rubbish. There have always been feminists that have done things. And so we should actually take heart of this, because even today, when we feel like, well, the masses of the women's liberation movement are really nowhere to be seen anymore, there are feminists, and like us here speaking and Women's Declaration International, there will always be pockets of feminists, often radical feminists, and continue our work. Anyway, Dale and I went to see Dora Russell. Now, some of you may know about Bertrand Russell, a philosopher, had to go to jail because he challenged the government, and so on and so on. And hardly anybody knew about Dora Russell, his wife. She had done many, many things before. She'd worked on a peace wagon, and she'd written quite a lot of books. Anyway, I remember we walked in there, and she did serve us a cup of tea, and then she started to berate us, like, well, these young women, obviously she thought we were very young. I mean, we were already into our 40s. We didn't know what we were doing. We shouldn't be doing what we were doing. We should be doing other things. And what I remember is that we actually exited her house quite soon and felt really quite like bedraggled rats because she'd given us a bit of a sermon. However, I think Dale must have gone back to her and interviewed her again, because I just reread the chapter today. It's a fabulous chapter about what Dora Russell did, all the things she did now. She was treated so badly, nothing new in that, by her famous husband. So that was a very funny story. And another funny story with Dale was when I took her to Switzerland, where my best Swiss friend, her family had a house in St. Moritz. So we were there, and my best friend had a very stupid husband who constantly criticized Dale and me and our feminism. And I was just about to give him a serve. And all of a sudden, Dale, who had tried to nicely, argue with him in a nice way, all of a sudden she looked at his hands and said, "Oh, Paul, I have just never seen a man with such nice hands." And I was just stunned, and then I had to get up and run out so I could finally laugh. And you wouldn't believe it, he fell for it and said, "Oh, that's nice of you, that's really nice." And so Dale did very unexpected things, because it's the same thing as much later in the 80s in Australia, when you might not believe this, but the government once had a non-sexist policy, non-sexist language policy, and this just had been proclaimed. And Dale, of course, was interviewed a lot because she'd written man-made language. And some clever journalist, a boy, went up to her and said, "Now, Dale, what do you think about manholes?" And quick, immediately she said, "Well, there should be more of them." And it was such wit, that we all just fell about laughing, that had other people, they couldn't really, they couldn't get to it. They just thought, "Oh, well, what is this woman?" But Dale also had her limits, and I actually sadly had to witness that. She didn't suffer fools gladly. I mean, who does? And it was this book, For the Record. I think it was on the previous screen, on this one. For the Record is a collection of interviews and accounts that Dale wrote with quite famous feminists. So from Betty Friedan to Kate Millett to Germaine Greer to Robin Morgan, Shulamit Firestone, and so on and so on. Phyllis Chesler, it had an awful lot of, Adrienne Rich has a lot of really important women in it. Then what Dale did, she wrote her piece on these women, and then she sent them her piece and asked them to comment on it, which demands some courage. And then about 10 of them wrote back, and she also included these comments in her in the book. And lo and behold, the book was really just about to be published by the Women's Press, and some very, very inexperienced, stupid copy editor at the latest minute changed so much. And it was not just, little language changes, it was actually meaning changes. And when Dale got that, and remember, so it was 82, I think, at the time. Remember, there's no internet at the time, no email. Everything was, you had to do it on paper. And I remember when Dale got this, she was absolutely devastated. It was really bad. I was walking with her. She wanted to go out and walk, and we were walking around. She was actually really seriously, almost suicidal, saying, "I can't do this. I'm going to throw myself over the bridge." I have never seen her that bad. What I can't remember is whether that got actually rectified, or whether the book came out with all these mistakes. I just read quite a bit in it today, and I can't see any obvious mistakes, but you just don't know. But that was really something that Dale, she had enough with that. She couldn't deal with that. And then, unfortunately, when she moved back to Australia, which was in 1986, that's also the year that I went to Australia. I got a 6-month scholarship to do research on women who had gone through IVF, and Dale moved back for good. And I have to say that the Australian feminists really started to treat her extremely badly. She didn't get any support from them at all, except, and I must say that, Robin Rowland and I from Deakin University and Betty McClellan and Coralie at in Cairns, we had summer institutes, women in and winter institutes, and Dale was a very welcome speaker to all of this, and the students had an absolute ball. So Dale's encouragement of other women, I don't know anybody else who has done more for that. And I'll come to an end. I mean, it's incredibly sad that such a brilliant woman, a woman of ideas, then comes down with, dementia. And so for the last 5 years, unfortunately, she couldn't live at home anymore. So she lived in a old people's home where she was cared for. But, for instance, she couldn't have her little dog with her, and she could not have any alcohol. And Dale had, quite liked to drink a bottle of Prosecco. And it was her sister Lynn who was her biggest and confidant throughout all her life, who smuggled in little bottles of Prosecco so that Dale would at least have some little comfort. That made us all very, very sad, and there's nothing, we can do about. And really, this awful disease, catches the brightest and the best. Nobody knows what to do about that. So I'm handing over to Susan now, and who will talk about quite some other things that the importance that Dale had in her life. I really miss her. I miss her greatly.
Thank you, Renate. I didn't get to meet Dale until considerably later, but I did hear about her book, Man-Made Language. A friend of mine said, I have to read it, and it sounded like something I would enjoy. So I was very surprised to discover that she was Australian, because I hadn't heard of her. But I do have a vague memory of standing in Regan's bookshop in Carlton in Melbourne and hearing somebody say, "That's Dale Spender." And by that stage, I knew who she was, because I was working in a feminist library, and I had actually realised that she had already written something like 9 books. And then, as Renate said, her book, Women of Ideas and What Men have Done to Them, came out. And I love the way that the word them is a double entendre. It's that what men have done to women's ideas and what men have done to women. It's very, very clever. Then a number of years passed, and in 1986, I applied for a job as an editor at Penguin Books. And I didn't get the job, but about 4 or 5 months after my interview, they called me in for another session. I got an interview with Jackie Gowell and Brian Johns at McCoppin's Bar in Collingwood, a great, meeting place for publishing people. Anyway, so they interviewed me, and I got that job. It was also around the same time that I met Renate. We met down at Deakin, although Renate didn't see me the day I saw her. But some weeks later we met. Anyway, my job at Penguin that I've got the interview for was to start at the beginning of the following year, so 1987. And Renate said, "Oh, would you like to come and meet Dale Spender?" And I said, "Oh, yes, that would be great." Anyway, it turned out that evening that Dale told me that she had put in a proposal to Penguin for a book series called the Penguin Australian Women's Library. And so you can see all the books here in this. And I mean, it's an incredible list of books.
Among them are things like The Fortunes of Mary Fortune, which is a book about by a 19th century crime writer that Lucy Sussex edited. But there were also fantastic things like Novelist, which is set in far North Queensland, and Mr. Hogarth's Will and Perkins Find. And what I had a great time doing was finding covers for these books. So this one here, Mr. Perkins Find, the painting is by Clara Southern, who's become very famous since then. Mr. Hogarth's Will, the painting by Vida Leahy. And then this absolutely fabulous cover on the No Vertican book, which is by Margaret Bevan and called The Drover's Wife. But not only did she bring novels from earlier times, she also brought this book, The Peaceful Army, which was, it's interesting doing it right now because it came out in 1938, which was the sesquicentenary of Australia. And it's edited by Flora Eldershaw. Flora Eldershaw was the other half of M. Barnard Eldershaw, lesbian writing there. And in it, it's got fabulous pieces by Mary Gilmore, Vince McCusack, Eleanor Dark, and you know, just incredible stuff. Margaret Preston. So the women of that period, it was a bit like, in a way, the Dora Russell book in the UK. And then she also brought out anthologies. Her selection, a book that was edited by Lynn Spender, her sister, which is the writings of 19th century women, and Bright and Fiery Truth, which are academic essays of that same period. But she didn't just do the books from the past, she also did, she did this incredible, look at this incredible book called The Penguin Anthology of Australian Women's Writing, which starts with a piece by a convict woman called Margaret Catchpole and ends with Antigone Kefala, who was a Greek-Australian writer living in Sydney, and Germaine Greer. And then she brought out an anthology of contemporary Australian women writers. And that one begins with Barbara Jeffries on a piece about the Drover's Wife and Diane Bell and Robin Archer. And it finishes with a piece by a play by Sarah Hardy. So that takes us through to about 1990. But at the same time she was doing this, she was, as Renate said, involved with Pandora Press, and she did these books. So the Mothers of the Novel was a kind of history of British women's writing, and then the other one, 2 Centuries of Australian Women's Writing, was a comparable sort of book about Australian writing. And then there's this book, The Incredible Journey by Catherine Martin, which is about an Aboriginal woman's journey across country. So she was doing really quite extraordinary things. And the Pandora and the Penguin were going together, so obviously she didn't have any time to sleep. But then, just going back to the Penguin, Spinifex distributed some of these books for a little while, but the only one we could get the rights to was The Peaceful Army. So you can actually get that as an ebook from us. Then in 1995, we published her book, Nattering on the Neck. And I think Dale agreed. We had only set up Spinifex in 1991, and I think in 92 or 3, she said, you can have my next book, which is sort of like what she did elsewhere. She enabled, she opened doors. So for us, as a tiny press, I mean, we didn't even have 20 books at that time. Her giving us this really important book was a great act of generosity. And a woman who worked in the State Library of Victoria said of the book that it was incredibly readable, and it was revolutionary in the way of negroponte. So in Melbourne, well, not long after Nattering on the Net was published, she gave a keynote speech in Melbourne in which she spoke about truth. And she said that truth used to be something that was enduring, that people through generations had agreed was important. Now she says truth is what's most recent. The last time we saw Dale was in 2014 at a conference, feminist conference in Brisbane. So like Renata, I miss Dale, I miss her energy, her wildness, her irascibility, her ability to answer back really, really fabulously quickly. So I hope that some of these books will get onto your reading list. Thank you.
Nata, that was really beautiful and moving. And yes, I remember Dale Spender's work from my feminist activism. I had friends who were mentors for me. So thank you so much. And now I'd like to hand over to Sand Hall.
Thank you, Janet. Hi, everyone. Land is life and sisterhood is powerful. And these are the two truths that have pretty much formed the women's lands in New South Wales 50 years ago that I'll be showing photos of and talking about. And this Australia Day weekend, I acknowledge that it is Survival Day and Invasion Day for First Nations, so many First Nations people. And our now 300 acres of women's lands are on unceded Aboriginal land of the Biripi people, always was, always will be. Yes, it's 3,000 acres. I'll speak a little and then I'll start the slideshow, which will make things a lot clearer. And I'll talk about tonight using photos that appear in the trilogy of books written by landswomen over the last 7 years. And that the lands very much grew out of the women's liberation movement of the 1970s through to now. It was built on a land-based utopian vision, some would say experiment, that women have created spaces to be in big nature, free from the male gaze, and full of challenges and adventures, places to retreat and heal, to gather and party, to strengthen and plan. Such isolation and lack of digital reception is not for everyone. And not everyone has had such a positive time there as I have. But those of us who love the lands and feel loved and nourished by the lands, and the women who collectively care for them, it's been a huge part, and still is, of our lives. And we have aimed to put the theory of women's liberation into practice. Dozens of women lived on the lands in the 70s and 80s. And these days we tend to come and go, not living there so permanently. It was really the heyday in terms of women living there, definitely was the 70s and 80s. And personally, I come and go. I live in Wollongong, New South Wales, so it's sort of a 9-hour trip of door to door. But I do it regularly, every 2 to 3 months or so. And in a few days, on Tuesday, I'll go up there for the whole of January, which is a treat for me. And it's about twice as long as I usually stay. I'm a member of the Mountain. There are 3 main lands. Generational change is happening. New and younger women are stepping up, and women from the 70s are dying, and with them go their stories. The 3 books in the trilogy are self-published and distributed. We tell our own stories in our own words, maintaining copyright and control. Film and television companies approach us, we say no thanks to their requests. Valuing safety, privacy and respect, autonomy and control are important. We have annual gatherings and meetings. Each of the three main lands are a separate legal entity, two co-ops and an association, with separate membership, although some are more than one. And eco-feminism is a shared value. Because we love being safe and free on these lands, we have weathered incredible ups and downs that would have broken up other groups of women. Our friendships go deep and our experiences of sisterhood are powerful. I'm going to screen share now. Looking at this picture on the right, the peak is the mountain. It was first discovered in 1973, is 1,000 acres of regenerating rainforest. Then the valley between those two hills in the middle is another 700 acres or so. And then to the left, from the valley floor up to that peak on the left there is her land, another 1,000 acres. There are other lands, but they are the ones that are mainly talked about in here. And this is the first book. I collected and published the stories in 2016. It's mainly stories of the mountain because that's what I'm a member of. And the others didn't really know what I was doing, or it was like, first there was the mountain, and then it spread. And the second one in 2019, shelters and building. So that's shelters, yes, on each of the lands, and building of community and friendship as much as infrastructure. The third one, 50 Years, has just been published November 2023 and is another one that covers the three main lands plus Bracken, which, as the crow flies, is about 20 k's away and is connected. And the books, for me, because I'm a photographer too, they're as much sort of photo albums as they are collections of written stories. And in this one, there are 25 contributors. Across all the books, there are 50, covering 75 chapters. And this one and pretty much the others too covers the 5 decades, 4 lands and several generations. This is Karen Hicks, who started the lands in 73. She was involved in Melbourne with Radical Lesbian group and set off to get some land, and then connected with women, mainly in Sydney and Melbourne, to, over the years, finance it, and with dances and all sorts of innovative and so many women have been involved over the years and contributed. And this is Karen, she is part of the mountain and an old growth forest section. This yellow Caribbean sort of dwarfs Karen. It was taken in the early 80s, and it's an amazing, like, nature is sanity as far as I'm concerned, and to have this place is phenomenal, or these places. And when women first went in the early 70s, there were 2 loggers' huts there. This is the mountain. This main one, and then a smaller one that became the kids' hut. And we lived in that until we started building. Well, we lived in it pretty much as a base for 20 years, because it took us about 20 years to build this communal hexagon. It was started in the 70s. At a time, you might have heard the adage connected with Amazon Acres or the lands: no meat, no men, no machines. In the early days, no power tools. This is DQ, the architect of the hex. And yeah, it took a while for the power tools to arrive. And the 20 years, it took a while for this to be built. But then women did go away and become carpenters, gain skills, and late 80s, sort of into the 90s, we added, this is the adding of a kitchen and a bathroom, the mud brick finishing, the cladding. I love the space. It did, in the mid-90s, we did need to re-roof it. So that's what this part is about. And because it took us 20 years to finish building it, those buttresses needed to go on partway through because it started to buckle, but they worked well. We had some very capable women through the whole process. And we're very happy with ourselves that we re-roofed and it was successful. And this is pretty much what it looks like today. This is a group of women who in 2018 had been gathering in the valley, new ones, older ones and many. It was the beginning of many gatherings. We've had one every year, October long weekend since then. This is Jack Draper's artistic impression of the hex, and I love it. It is a favourite place. This is the inside for me. When I go there, I'm often the only one, certainly in the hex, and sometimes the only one there. And that solitude, it's 10 kilometres to the nearest neighbour. I love it. It's got everything that is needed. This is Maisie Mei-Ling. She was cooking up cakes for this 2018 gathering. She put on the lunch, soup and magnificent cakes. It's as you can see, it's a fairly comfortable space with the mezzanine in the back there with a library and a sleeping platform. This is Mei-Ling again. This was in 1981, photo by Barb McDonald. Maisie decided to live under a tarp by this rock near the creek, and she did that for quite some time. And then sort of fast forward about 30 years. What are we up to there? 10 years, another 10 years. This is a self-portrait she did in Karen's little hex. She was staying there. She did a lot of mowing and would come and go and was doing a photography course and did this one. This is my hut. It's just a one-room little hut that I built in the early 90s. We're putting on the tank. This is taken in more recent years. The tank, by now, it needs replacing. That will happen. And there's a lot more clearing that's happened around it too. The machinery part of it, we frequently need to engage bulldozer drivers, or one in particular who has a long association, to clear the road, clear the land. We're in a regenerating rainforest. Different women have created different shelters on the mountain. And here the valley, there was an old farmhouse that accidentally burnt down in the early 80s. Women in the valley would have meetings frequently. There were quite a few at this point. This is the late 80s. There was an old dairy there, but unfortunately we lost in the fires of 2019. But here women are working out the legal next step, the one that ended up becoming an incorporated association. This is Margot Oliver. She built this stunning place there, which when you're on the veranda has a magnificent view up to the mountain. This is Epona's octagon, also with a view up to the mountain. Mysteriously and extremely unfortunately, both these shelters, which were the best in the valley, were burnt in an arson situation about 20 years ago or 15 years ago. This shelter I stayed in the valley in the late 80s, and it shows the simplicity and the beauty. When it wasn't raining especially, and La Nina and El Nino have come in significant years of cycles, it was typical of some of the shelters. This one was a bit more closed in. This one, Kira's by the creek in the valley. Shah's up on the hill. It was like being in a bird's nest, really. It was magnificent view and often in the mist, and you could hear across the valley. Sometimes it was just a sleeping bag under the stars. Herland is the other main land. This is Tashi and Jan building Tashi's house. This is building Jan's house. This is Jan's house, which is sturdy and mighty as this fireplace. This is what the kitchen looks like today. Women come and go. There's a lot of bush regeneration happens on her land. and yeah, often preferring to live outside. It's a great base. Tashi built her a yurt near that house of Jan's. The top part of her land, there were these horse corrals and a shepherd's hut there when women first came, and then they added on to them. This is Sky and Jackie's place in its heyday in the 80s. Mei Ling later came as well, and this place also, unfortunately, to go back, was burnt down in the November 2019 fires. They were really quite devastating. This is Phoenix's 12-sided shelter, also on her land. Chloe opted for a tarp for a while, and women started building a big barn up the top. And this is Lava and Trish of Craft Builders. They created their own building company with other women and would just, spend a lot of time helping us on the lands with creating really sturdy structures. When there are gatherings there, this is the base of where everything happens, and women generally sleep along that front section, as well as in tents and cars. And this is the valley. This is Miranda in the valley in the late 70s. Music has always been a really important part. And at that time too, in the late 70s, 80s, there were a lot of girls living there, a lot of children. And it was a strong sort of, sisterhood family, amazing sort of upbringing and collective caring. This one's the mountain. Again, music, this is the mountain. So many of these women are no longer with us, unfortunately. The mountain, again, many of these ones are. And this Savage on the right here, she was a bushwoman, and this is her too. Lived around, she actually would leave first the mountain, too much politics and rules, and squatted the valley. Then another group of women bought the valley. Same with her land. Time to move on, squatted at the top of her land, and then women bought that place as well. She was certainly a woman of the lands, and for her 50th birthday, we built her a house away from everyone at the top of her land. She had $5,000, and that's what we spent on materials. And Trish, the amazing builder, supervised that side of it. I helped coordinate. And that place, we checked it out a couple of years ago with some of the young ones. It survived the fire. It's still there, even though Savage herself died some sort of 20, 25 years ago. Mysteriously, perhaps a snake, perhaps a heart attack, we're not sure. But she died there, which is how I'm sure she would have liked it. Horses were a big part of the lands. Especially Sky and Jackie and her land, only for the first 20 years or so, really. They're not really appropriate to the land, and when it was dry, there was not the grass for them. But it was fabulous for the girls during school holidays. They would have amazing adventures, and including going off on long rides at times. And there was a donkey. Joshua was around there for a while. And Daffodil the cow on her land was silver. We would have events like this is the valley. We had Amazon Games a couple of 2 or 3 times in the 80s. Chris Sitka, some of you may know, she lived there for many years, and several of them in this tent near the garden, again before the big rains came. And she's one of our elders. Like this is her last year. And in the early days, we didn't have elders, and I think it made a big difference. It's interesting now that there are many still from the 70s who are filling that role. This is sisters Annie and Elaine, who lived local family in Warhope, and which is near the lands, and had a caravan in the valley that they would come and go from as well. Janet from Aotearoa and her daughter, Sarah, visiting. She spent time in the valley years ago as well. Sky. There are a few extreme situations happen. One was when a neighbour gouged our access road on the mountain, got a bulldozer driver to stop us being able to get up and down. She was illegally logging on our property and elsewhere, and also would have to say she and her family, she was a doctor, were quite lesbophobic. I was bitten by a tiger snake 30 years ago and lucky to be alive. And as I was saying before, the fires of 2019 took 2 weeks to do a slow burn up the mountain. Fortunately, did not destroy shelters on the very top of the mountain, but did destroy some in the valley and herland. It made access to firewood that much easier for us. These are two new mountain women new to the mountain, sort of from the digital. We've got the pre-digital and the digital generations. And they've got some fantastic practical skills, as you can see, certainly in power tools now, although they would be electrically charged, and do home improvements and maintenance around the place. Blue on the right here is a blacksmith, and she and Yuki have just put this fire hood on the hex in Karen's hut. It was smoking a bit much. In the valley, there is now a shed. The dairy burnt down recently. There's a shed, and these women were putting the veranda on. And this is that shed and that space surrounded by the creek. You won't find much flat land on these women's lands, and this is kind of the valley's best spot and beautiful place for a gathering of young and older. The mountain. The creating of the tank stand and putting the tank on again by a group of the younger ones that have been coming and going. They tend to come up on their own and party and just have a great time. And putting in this bush bath was part of it. There is a passing on from older to younger. This is Mei Ling on the left, working with Beck. There's a mountain song called Ishtar. This was at one of the launches of the second volume on her land at a gathering we had there. And there's also passing on of building skills. Tashi in particular organises gatherings on her land, and they built a little open cafe. Yeah. Happy with chainsaw skills. And we entertain ourselves, we have fun. When we have gatherings, we have concerts. We also have passion, some more than others. And this is Danny and her girlfriend. They do a lot of animal rescue. I was sitting on the back of the hex, and the swamp wallaby and her Joey come along. The nature is incredible. Yeah. And the likes of the bush I find quite magical. I don't know if you can see it, but for me there are two faces in those rocks in the middle of that. It's like dogs' faces from the top to the bottom, or horses or some creature, and they are drinking. Their eyes are about halfway up the rock, and I just get so entertained, and I love that wandering in that solitude. And mysterious things happen. Where did this light come from in the creek and under that little waterfall rock? Maybe it's a firefly, I don't know, but I love that picture. And that's it. Thank you very much.
I'm enthralled. That's just amazing. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much, Sand. I think it's incredibly inspiring hearing about your work and the women. And it's been beautiful hearing about Dale in that same time. It's really moving and beautiful. Thank you so much. Break the spell. Now we're moving into the modern times. And so I'd like to hand over to Jennifer and Karen, please.
Thank you so much, Janet. allow me to introduce myself. My name is Karen Smith. I'm the founder of AWA. This is us, the affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances. I'll be joined directly by Jennifer Rocchioli, who is a member of our writing team. We'll be giving a bit of an overview. I'll be giving an overview of what we've been up to recently at AWA. And Jennifer will be giving some detail on a couple of letters that we've written recently to the World Health Organization about their the development of their transgender guidelines, health guidelines. So thank you again for having us on. This is us, AWA, the affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances. A quick overview, we have 6 affiliate groups. You can see their names down the side there. What they essentially stand for is Canberra, Tasmania, Queensland, WA, SA and Victoria. So we as AWA are a bit of an umbrella body for these women's action alliances around Australia. We have members in each of those areas that I've mentioned. As AWA, these are the things that we get up to. We do submissions and letters. Some of the things that we've done since we were last on this webinar, we've put in a submission to the ACMA about the Communications and Media Authority about the proposed misinformation and disinformation bill. We've submitted to DFAT about Australia's new international gender strategy. We have written to the AHRC for the Lesbian Action Group's request for exemption to meet, and we also followed up on their preliminary decision. Many of you will be familiar with these matters already. And we have put in various coalition letters as well with our coalition partners. You can see them there. Australian Feminists for Women's Rights, LGBAA, COAL, Coalition of Activist Lesbians. WAC is the Canberra group that has also contributed to some of these submissions, and the Women's Rights Network Australia. And I know that Kit Kowalski is here with us today as well. Our most recent submissions, or letters in fact, have been to the World Health Organization about their transgender health guideline. Many of you will be familiar with that, but I'm going to throw to Jennifer now, who is a key member of our writing team, and she will talk a little bit about the 2 letters that we've written to the World Health Organization and the strategizing that we undertook to get those letters together, and why we decided to take this approach, and also the fact that we sent them as a part of a coalition from Australian Feminists for Women's Rights, COAL, LGBAA and WRNA. So I'm going to throw over to Jennifer now.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks everyone for having me. So what I'm doing tonight is speaking to the AWA response to the World Health Organization's 18th of December announcement that they were developing a guideline on the health of trans and gender diverse people. The WHO invited public comment on the composition of the Guideline Development Group, which I'll just abbreviate as GDG, that would be taking that forward. But the due date was scheduled for the 8th of January, in other words, during the traditional Christmas New Year holiday period. We saw that as an attempt to avoid scrutiny, and we weren't alone in that view. The UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls protested in her letter to the director of the WHO that the consultation timing didn't allow professional stakeholders such as politicians, experts, medical practitioners and institutions to send their responses. We'll also note GenSpec's rapid response petition and analysis was really helpful. They identified very quickly apparent bias in the proposed GDG, that's the group membership, and a failure to follow the WHO's own handbook of guideline development, which stipulates a really lengthy, detailed process for the development of guidelines. So our chief letter writer sacrificed her holiday time to begin working straight away on a response from AWA. I came in a bit later, along with Karen here on the letter writing. Just to put this response in context, Our process generally is to use facts, evidence, reason, and a courteous tone to build our case. We engage with governing institutions and point out where they're already established frameworks and obligations designed to protect women and girls are being eroded, undermined, ignored, or disregarded. We see this as taking the fight to authorities and reminding them to do their job, stick to their lane, attend to their jurisdiction, and stop the overreach. And stop giving in to the bias of unelected lobby groups of trans activists. We're not aligned with any political party or church, and that's quite important to our credibility and to our intellectual stance, which is based in reason and secular morality. By contrast, as you'll know, gender ideology is rooted in dogma and quasi-religious notions, amongst other things. Even if we didn't think that the proposed GDG smacked of trans activism because of the former president of WPATH being on it and numerous other WPATH associates, we were concerned that the World Health Organization might, in its eagerness to recognise the vulnerability of one group of people and the challenges that they face to access good quality healthcare, that they might rubber stamp a guideline that would discriminate against women and girls and or put women and girls at risk. We have previously addressed letters to health bodies raising similar concerns. We decided on 2 letters. So one would go to the proposed GDG, the one that we thought was biased, raising our concerns about the gender-affirming bias that was inherent in its membership, concerns about its apparent inclusion of children as recipients of gender-affirming healthcare, and asking them to manage their really obvious conflicts of interest. And then we thought we'd send a second letter to a committee that sits above them, the Guidelines Review Committee, which has some oversight responsibilities. As we discovered, they run the WHO handbook, and this became quite central to our argument. The second letter, which I think was a little bit more punchy, was CC'd to Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus. I don't know if I've pronounced that correctly, who's the Director General of WHO and who you would have seen during the pandemic on TV quite a bit. We CC'd it to Australian parties as well, our Chief Medical Officer and the Federal Health Department. That's partly just a strategy to ensure that if a letter doesn't get passed on, that other people have seen it. These letters reflect our basic approach, which is that how we approach established governing institutions that we perceive are being undermined, including from within, by gender ideology, because that undermining produces real risk for women and girls. And we explain this in our communications. We explain it and we back it with evidence. In this case, the WHO has an exceptionally detailed process for guideline development, precisely because their guidelines are so influential. It's a process that must be upheld by those with the power to do so. Just by the by, there are also national medical institutions which have their own guideline development processes, and these I've learned are very stringent as well. And of course, it's because so much is at stake. Not only the health of people, but also the funding of public health. All of this is potentially impacted by a guideline. So this was the gist of our second letter, which called for the Oversight Committee to use its powers to investigate the GDG's exclusive focus on gender-affirming care, including hormones, and for them to intervene in other ways. I won't go through all of those. We're pleased to say that, as Karen's already mentioned, our approach received support from other key Aussie organisations who are part of this battle. Our co-signatories included AF4WR, COAL, LGBAA and the WRNA. Our letters were improved by their contributions, and we look forward to working with you again. As part of our strategy of engagement, we do also seek a reply from the institutions we've communicated with. We've not received a direct reply from WHO yet, but it is encouraging to note that WHO responded publicly to the consternation surrounding their announcement. So a week after our first letter went in, WHO announced publicly an extended deadline for feedback and stated the guideline would only apply to adults, not to children. So that was two big concessions on issues that had been commonly raised by people responding to the WHO announcement. Their press release also made some other moves, which are perhaps worth thinking about. So this is WHO sort of defending or justifying their moves. They said that the scope of the guideline was based on requests from some WHO member states, and this was a process element which we had asked about. They said that they had held a stakeholder consultation back in May 2022 with experts, but actually we haven't been able to find any info about this supposed consultation out in the public domain. And that was another element that we had highlighted in our letter. They stated that the proposed GDG would include researchers with relevant technical expertise, but what we had highlighted was their obligation to also include diverse perspectives, training and experiences to keep the guidelines recommendations from reflecting a single viewpoint. And this is a direct quote from the handbook. In other words, this is what is meant to happen. The guidelines are not meant to reflect a single viewpoint. So we'd suggested that they include detransitioner perspectives, perhaps particularly those relating to medical harm, and that they should attend to the published views of advanced member states that have recently investigated best practice for transgender people and that have amended their publicly funded health system practices away from single-track gender-affirming practices. Sadly, as you all know, Australia is not amongst that group of nations. In other words, I'm going through that because I think it's worth noting that our arguments were really cogent and they may gain further traction. We seem to be on the right track after all, given that WHO is now being forced to justify its efforts. It's also worth noting, and I think it perhaps reflects GenSpec's intervention in particular, their petition and their analysis. One of the most prominent of the WPATH activists, who was named as a member of the group, they suddenly discovered that they had a diary clash and they won't be part of the guideline development process anymore. They had made some really notorious public statements, which GenSpec happily shared with the rest of the world. So they're not part of that process anymore, which is a bit of a win for us, I think. I think I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Jennifer's given an excellent, some good detail on the approach that we took as regards these two WHO letters. And you can find these letters on our website. There's the website address just here at the bottom of your screen. And you can also contact us via email, but the copies of the letters are there. Jennifer also mentioned other health organisations that we have approached. One of them has been our own Department of Health and Aged Care. The Secretary of DOHAC, Blair Cumley, we wrote to him with our coalition partners last year asking about their participation in the AUS. Of course, we were using a lot of Kit Kowalski's data and freedom of information requests for that letter. We did follow up when we got no response, and then the follow-up, the response to the follow-up was, yeah, sure, we're having a think about it. We'll get back to you soonish, but we've not heard back from them again, so we now have a follow-up to the follow-up in place that will be sent off in the next couple of weeks. So we have a few things going on. Here's just a bit of a quick update on what we've been up to. Since we last presented at this webinar, we've now got a new affiliate group, which I mentioned earlier, the Women's Action Alliance Victoria, and I've seen some of our WAV members here tonight, so welcome. We're currently working on, and this is where the expertise and experience of our writing team is so important with Jennifer and other members. We are putting together a letter of concern to CEDAW, to the CEDAW committee, because we understand that they are looking into gender issues and especially transgender issues as regards CEDAW. Some of you will have heard some of the scuttlebutt around about that, so we're going to write a letter of concern. It's quite lengthy at the moment. We think it needs to be in order to get everything across. We'll also be shopping that around, seeing if the coalition partners and others might be interested in co-signing. We're also working on, which is rather a longer term project, what we call our sports letter. The intention there is to write to national sporting bodies whose international bodies have started to put some limits on men's participation in the female-only category in sports. We intend that letter to do a job of work across a number of different sporting codes, like I say, starting with national bodies and then moving down to state and territory bodies. Our sisters in WAWA, the Western Australian Women's Action Alliance, wrote to Reem Al-Salem after the Lesbian Action Group's request for exemption was first knocked back by the preliminary decision came out from the AHRC about the Lesbian Action Group's request for exemption. So Reem Al-Salem, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on violence against women and girls, wrote back to our WAWA sisters and said, yes, very interested, please send us testimonies. So the last couple of days, this has only happened the last couple of days, we've been talking to some of our coalition partners about where we might sit in that response, or how we might help with their own responses. So this is part of our general approach is we can do stuff ourselves, but we'd rather do stuff in coalition with others. We think that's more effective. We can then pool and share resources and we can offer assistance. So there have been occasions, for example, where we've written letters and we've handed them to another group in order to, because we felt that the letter might have been better coming from that group. So we're also a bit strategic about not just having stuff because we've written it, but who is it best coming from? Again, just another one of our ways of operating. Our Canberra group, WAC, Women's Action Alliance Canberra, we're going to incorporate. This has come out of the LAG's business with the AHRC. We just felt that it would be handy to have another group in Australia at least, and there are a couple, but another one that's perhaps incorporated so that we could find it possibly easier to bring legal actions against various parties, but we'll see how that pans out. But that's the idea there. QA, our Queensland group, have a wonderful blog. Every month they blog local action, and you may see some familiar faces here. Oh, I'll tell you about the summit in a minute. Some familiar faces here. So they blog about actions that have been happening in Queensland. They often interview women in Queensland as well and put up interviews with women. So Anna McCormack's been interviewed on their blog as well. So that's a worthwhile blog looking at. You can get to all of our group's sites from our main page. This is the Canberra group who did this is Women's Action Alliance Canberra, who did a banner drop on gender medicine. And we always aim for busy parkways so we can gather traffic. And then we keep a tally of positive and negative reactions, just so that we know how things kind of worked out. I'll just take you back to our summit, last order of business probably. We are hoping to hold a summit in October, Friday the 4th and Saturday the 5th in Canberra, so further details to come. We're working on a bit of a program where each day we have we have 2 sessions to start the day. where everyone's welcome, all vetted women are welcome. And of course, there will be vetting. Sadly, we have to do that. But we're starting to put together a program around things like effective activism, what works, what's been successful in others' campaigns as well. Supporting women's liberation is another topic that we're thinking of running a session on. And then in the afternoon, we think it's important that we start to get our AWA members across the states and territories together so that we can look at what we've been doing nationally, locally, what's worked, what's not worked, what do we want to focus on, what do we want to achieve, how do we use our resources in the best way possible. So that's us. We are the affiliation of Australian Women's Action Alliances. Sorry, I can't get through to this last this last slide. Yes, we welcome you. Please email us if you're interested. Get in touch. We can run you through our model and how we work. Please visit our website and look at our submissions. And our motto is getting it done together. And that's certainly what we're hoping to do. Thank you, as always, for having us. And yeah, I'll stop talking now and back to Janet. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. It's really wonderful to see so much energy and so much work and so much connection between women. So now we have an update from another awesome group, which is also full of energy and connecting women in really wonderful ways. So if I could hand over to you, Kit.
Thank you so much, Janet. So yeah, I'm here talking from the Women's Rights Network Australia. I am one of the founders of this network, and we are modelled on the UK organisation Women's Rights Network. WRNA is about connecting women across the aisle and across the country. We're really here as a network, and we're just recognising that so many women feel incredibly alienated by what's happening in with gender identity and what's happening to women's rights at the moment. And many women feel that they are muzzled, they can't speak, they don't have anyone they can talk to. And so we try to create a space that is safe and welcoming for women to firstly speak and gain courage and to take action. Yeah, so we are about connecting women across the island, across the country. And I'm here today to give an update on our campaign around the New South Wales LGBTIQA+ equality amendment legislation bill. So this is a bill that was introduced into Parliament by independent MP Alex Greenwich on the 23rd of August last year. Now, we knew this was coming, and there was it was in the works for about 18 months or so, and he did a bit of a closed consultation. So he did accept submissions from the community, and he did accept submissions, but he didn't involve any organisations in the drafting process except for ACON and Equality Australia and some of those organisations who are obviously very pro-trans activist. So the Equality Bill, it's a very wide-ranging, detailed and convoluted piece of legislation that delivers, amongst other things, self-ID. It also opens the gate on commercial surrogacy in New South Wales. It criminalises misgendering. It criminalises failing to support a family member's gender transition. It also abolishes all summary offences regarding prostitution and pimping. And so it really makes women quite vulnerable in New South Wales. I sort of jokingly say that I think self-ID is the least harmful part of this bill. It is so bad. It is absolutely terrible. Now, we have many challenges when we're fighting this legislation. The biggest challenge is how confusing the legislation itself is. So initially, Alex had said that he was going to introduce an equality omnibus bill. He has actually split that into 3 bills. The first is the Equality Bill. The second is the Conversion Practices Bill. and he has tabled both of those. And thirdly, there is an intersex rights bill, which is yet to be tabled. So we still don't know what is in that bill. And then for good measure, the ALP had also promised to ban conversion practices by the end of 2023. And so they started consultation on their own bill for conversion practices separately. And so this has created a very confusing landscape for us to be working in. Now, if you do want a good overview of the Equality Bill, go to the WDI channel and have a look at the presentation given by Jade in September last year. So she came in to WDI and talked about the Equality Bill, and that was part of a workup for a detailed seminar that we actually did to try to tool people up to protest to their MP about this bill. And that was really good. We got at least sort of 60 people registering for that, and at least 40 on the night. And our mailing list is currently at around 200, and it continues to grow. I just am here to give a bit of an update about our campaign. And I just want to note as well that we are working closely with some other organisations, namely Coalition of Activist Lesbians, LGBT Alliance Australia, and Australian Feminists for Women's Rights. But I'll be talking mostly about the actions that we've been leading and coordinating. So first up, I did manage to get a tiny bit of coverage in the mainstream media. This was back on 11th of August, before we'd even seen the bills. We organised to get an electronic billboard up in Belmore. And of course, one of the reasons for that was to try to interest the media in a story. Now, you can see, if you read the story, there's still confusion about what the legislation is about. So they really made the story all about conversion practices, and they really skipped covering the self-ID aspect. So we've got this billboard up here, which says self-ID gives men and boys the key to women and girls' change rooms and sports teams. But the article doesn't really touch on self-ID at all. And I have a quote in there, and they've taken the one thing I said about conversion, and they've used that quote. So we realised, recognising that people are confused. They're confused about the issues. They think gay is trans. They think that we want gay conversion, or we're upset somehow about gay conversion. And talking to politicians, we realised that they were really confused about the issues. So one of the things last year we did was a 12-week letter writing campaign. So each week we put together a dossier of information on a particular background topic that this bill touches on. So girls deserve fair sport, TQ is not equal to LGB, lobby groups make bad policy, the situation in the UK and how they're starting to wind some of this back, etc. So we did that, and we encouraged others to write to their MP. So that helped us to really get a bit of volume in the campaign. And it helped us as well because we weren't burdened with writing multiple tailored letters to MPs every single week. We just produced this research, and then we could write as individuals. One lesson I would say I have learned from this particular exercise was that while some people did send us the letter that they wrote to their MP, and that was really wonderful. We got some great letters and we were able to share some of them. It was really hard to gauge the success of this campaign because it wasn't easy to tell if someone had actually gone and followed the advice and used the material. So while we had some people feeding back and saying, yes, I used it, or I found this hard to use, or I found this easy to use, we didn't really get that sense of volume and how many letters were being sent. So a lesson I would learn for next time would be to try to make it easier for people to report back that they actually did that action that we asked them to do. We have, in terms of our letter writing, there has been really mixed results, lobbying and letter writing. So the politicians, they are really confused. They think LGB is GI, they don't really know what's happening. There's still confusion about the Equality Bill and the Conversion Bill. So we'll go and talk to them or write to them about equality and sex self-ID, and they will come back and they will say, oh, you know, people are harmed by conversion practices, or they'll say, oh, we think Labor is introducing a bill to cover this off, which clearly refers to the conversion portion, not the sex self-ID portion. So the ALP's bill is really, you know, putting a spanner in the works. We're noting that the ALP are likely to vote on block, and we're not really getting a sense of which way they're going to swing. So, you know, it is a really challenging landscape, but we're not giving up. We have had some really good meetings and really good calls where we've been able to put the issues out there and have really intelligent conversations. And sort of a lot of the people who are doing lobbying have come away feeling quite positive about the interactions, that at least they've been heard, the materials have been taken away, and, you know, the issues have been discussed. And we are getting, you know, quite a lot of boilerplate responses to the letters that we're writing, and they're very equivocal. So these boilerplate responses will say, we realise this is a complex issue, we'll take due care and we'll take your concerns into account when we make a decision, and we're not going to tell you what that decision is. So, you know, we're still in a very murky environment. So not content with lobbying, we have also taken it to the streets. We had a speak out in front of New South Wales Parliament in November, and you can read about that on our website. And we've got some wonderful videos of women giving speeches out there in front of Parliament. Everyone involved reported that there was very little negativity. There was about 20 women came up, and then we had bystanders sort of coming and going, including we had an MP come over and say hi and have a chat. So it's really encouraging when that happens. We also organised a statewide day of action on the 20th of January. So that was last weekend. So essentially we encouraged women to get out there, to leaflet, to do a banner drop, to take a picture of themselves, to tweet using the hashtag #ThisIsNotEquality, and to use the materials on respectoursex.org, which is our dedicated campaign website for this campaign, and to do chalking and to tag Chalk About It on Twitter. So that was really good. We had women all over the state doing various things. So we had leafleting and banner drops. We had women going leafleting at Marrickville Metro, which, if you're from Sydney, you'll know is a very woke area. Sydney, Balmoral Beach, Coffs Harbour, Newcastle, and other locations. So there's just some pictures of some of the leafleting activities. And we have a lot of printable materials that are available on the Respect Our Sex website. So we're always generating more materials so that, you know, you can print those off, you can hand them out, you can give them to an MP, you can give them to a friend or family member, you can email them if you want to. And so just a few more pictures of our banner drops on our statewide day of action. So we had some women going out in front of Jenny Leong's office and Chris Minns' office. And here's Monique doing a bit of an impromptu speak out with the megaphone in front of Chris Minns' office. So we've actually got video of that up as well. And we had a railway bridge in Tempe as well, with a banner that says, "Help us fight the new homophobia. Transition is gay conversion." And a banner being held up in City of Sydney, sex not gender, existential crisis, class war on women. We had women go down to Newcastle today, and some of the women who live in Newcastle, targeting the offices of MPs who are down there. So member for Charlestown and state member for Newcastle, holding up similar banners. And the idea of this is, obviously this is happening on a weekend, but we actually put these onto social media. We tag the MPs, we make them aware that, you know, that women are not happy with this. And we try to generate a bit of discomfort for them on social media. Now, we also did a little banner drop outside of Alex Greenwich's office, and he's the MP who's actually put out the equality bill. And when I first saw this photo, I thought, oh no, we'll have to crop this person out who's walking behind. And then I looked a little bit closer, and I saw that this was actually a bloke. So we put this image up uncropped on our Twitter, and it went a little bit nuts. So we had all sorts of people commenting, you know, lost for words, pictures worth 1,000 words. This is what we're talking about. This is the issue that, and this image actually, it was shared very widely, let's say. So people started retweeting it in other languages. And then people even started memeing it. So, and my favorite here is at the front, the gender, it's just nuts, which is, you know, which is pretty good. Like, it just demonstrates exactly what's going on. And this kind of golden opportunity generates quite a lot of buzz. So in the end, we got like 150,000 eyeballs onto this image. And it was shared very widely. So, you know, sort of 300 retweets or quote tweets. And, you know, I know that Twitter activism isn't everything, but it's also not nothing as well. And this kind of activism got us some exposure, got us the interest of a small Canadian podcast called the Josh and Artemis Show. They're sort of freedom types, I guess, is probably the best way to describe them. And they do a daily video podcast, and we actually did an appearance on their show. So that gave us another little bit of an opportunity to get on and to talk about this. So while we haven't had a lot of success in the mainstream media, and I know I had that one article back in August, but we've had some nibbles after that, but it's been very hard to actually land a journalist to talk about this since then. So we're very much concentrating on that grassroots media. Just a couple of notes on how we organise for this campaign. We're having weekly New South Wales Action Group meetings. We're also having weekly campaign strategy meetings. We're having monthly social events, so getting together, having drinks, you know, having a bit of a laugh, eating some chips, and being in a pub, and just, you know, existing as humans is also really important. And that's where we're able to bring new people in as well. They're able to meet us and, you know, to see that we're, you know, nice people that are good to hang out with. And we're also in constant contact on WhatsApp and Signal chat groups and email. So we're constantly kind of talking over these issues and new developments in what we're doing. In terms of next milestones, the 8th of February is when the bill is tabled for debate in the lower house, and it may be voted that day, or the vote may be deferred to the 14th of March. So they are most likely dates for something to happen. We will be in the Parliament and we'll be outside the Parliament on both of those days. So we do have the intention to do an action if the bill is passed. At this stage, we honestly don't know, but it's very likely that it will pass the lower house, and then the fight will move to the upper house. And so there's going to be some very hard lobbying in the coming months. Now, I do have a request. So we do have a request that that everyone actually participates in a Call Your MP action that we're doing over the next couple of weeks, or the next week, I guess. So we're trying to mobilise women to actually pick up the phone, to call an MP, call their office and say, listen, we don't want sex self-ID. So we actually have a campaign page for this on respectoursex.org that has a script that you can follow. It has documents you can download and send to the MP in a follow-up email. So at this point, we want to dial up the pressure a little bit, and we'd really like your assistance in helping us to make it known to MPs that there's no community support for sex self-ID, no matter what the lobby groups are telling us. And oops, I'll just go back a little bit. And we have, these are some of the really high quality documents that we have that are available to email to MPs as well, and to print out as flyers. So we have the reality of male sexual offending, which just talks about the facts and the statistics that are known, that saying the magic word, saying I am a woman, doesn't change male psychology. It doesn't change the male body, that men still have male patterns of criminality, even if they say those magic words. We have a great sex self-ID checklist, which is just a series of questions that you can ask someone about sex self-ID, and it's a really handy thing to take with you to an MP meeting. So it asks things like, you know, does a 6-year-old girl have a right to shower in the change rooms of the swimming pool and not see a penis? And of course, you know, the answer, the moral answer, the ethical answer, we know the answer is yes, but with sex self-ID, she would not have that right. And it's a really hard-hitting questionnaire, list of questions. We have the dilemma of the gender sex self-identification dilemma, which is a pamphlet that talks about there's a couple of guys in Spain who've recently got into a little bit of a spat because one of them has accused the other one of not being very sincere about being a woman. So they're in this debate about who's womaning hard enough. And so the pamphlet just tries to highlight that this is a ridiculous situation. We have two men who are arguing about who's more of a woman or who's really a woman, when they're both pretending to be women. They have no claim. And we also have a timeline of women's rights in Australia that just goes through how recently we have won some of the rights to single-sex spaces, and especially the provisions, the respect for same-sex relationships between women in Australia. So that's just some of the materials that we have that we'd ask people to send to their MPs. So remember, please go to respectoursex.org and also find us on Twitter at WRN Australia. And thank you very much. Back to you, Janet.
Thank you, Kit. What an amazing campaign. It's fantastic and so easy to use the materials and do the thing. It's no excuse to feel overwhelmed anymore. It's all laid out there for us. It's been an amazing webinar. I'd like to thank Renate Klein, Susan Hawthorne, Sand Hall, Jennifer Rocchioli, Karen Smith, and Kit Kowalski for giving absolutely brilliant performances tonight and showing in 2024 in huge style. So thank you so much. Massive round of applause for all of you. And a special thanks to Renate for missing some of the tennis.